How to break a neck. Potassium cyanide. Rat poison. Those were John Skelton's Google searches, 1 week before his 3 sons disappeared forever. Andrew was 9. Alexander was 7. Tanner was 5. Their bodies have never been found. For 15 years, he refused to say what he did with them. He was days away from walking free. Now he's charged with their murders. $60 million bond. And their mother is still waiting to bury her babies. Before we go any further, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because this father told lie after lie after lie about what happened to his children. He blamed the Amish. He invented a woman who doesn't exist. He even blamed an Amish reality TV star. And investigators say none of it was true. This is the story of 3 little boys who trusted their father. This is the story of a mother's 14-year nightmare. And this is the story of how a man thought he could kill his own children and walk away free. As we move on, I want you to see these boys as more than just names in a news story. Andrew Ryan Skelton was 9 years old in November 2010. He was the oldest, the protective big brother. He loved sports and video games. He had a smile that could light up a room. He was in 4th grade, looking forward to Christmas, excited about the holiday season. Alexander William Skelton, Alex to his family, was 7. The middle child, stuck between his older brother and baby brother, finding his own place in the family. He was in 2nd grade. He was curious about the world. He had his whole life ahead of him. Tanner Lucas Skelton was just 5 years old, the baby of the family. He was in kindergarten, still learning to tie his shoes, still believing in Santa Claus. He looked up to his older brothers. He trusted the adults in his life to keep him safe. These were not statistics. These were children. Real children with real dreams and real futures that were stolen from them. Remember their faces. Remember their names. Remember that they mattered. Morenci, Michigan. Population, roughly 2,000 people. The kind of small town where everyone knows everyone. Where kids ride their bikes down quiet streets. Where families gather for Thanksgiving dinner without locking their doors. It was the day after Thanksgiving, November 26, 2010, when Tanya Zuvers drove to her ex-husband's house to pick up her 3 sons. The boys had spent the holiday with their father, John Skelton. It was supposed to be a simple custody exchange. Tanya had sole custody. She and John were in the middle of a divorce, but she'd agreed to let him have the children for Thanksgiving. Her whole family was in town for a local high school football game, and the boys were excited to go shopping for fan gear. When Tanya stopped hearing from John about pickup details that afternoon, she drove to his house. She knocked on the door. No answer. She tried calling. No response. Something was wrong. What Tanya didn't know was that her ex-husband wasn't home. He was in the emergency room at a nearby hospital. He was being treated for a broken ankle, an injury he told hospital staff he'd sustained while attempting suicide by hanging. He claimed he'd fallen from a rope tied around the 2nd-floor banister of his home. When police entered John Skelton's house, what they found was a scene of chaos. Broken glass everywhere. Severed appliance cords scattered across the floor. A noose still hanging from the 2nd-floor railing. A Bible open on a table with a verse circled. And a note that would haunt investigators for the next 15 years. The note was addressed to Tanya. It read, "You will hate me forever, and I know this." Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner were nowhere to be found. The scene inside John Skelton's house told a story of chaos and violence. The broken glass suggested a struggle or destruction. The severed appliance cords were disturbing. Why would someone cut electrical cords unless they were being used for something sinister? The noose hanging from the banister showed that Skelton had at least considered ending his own life. Or perhaps it was a prop, designed to generate sympathy and deflect suspicion. The circled Bible verse added another layer of mystery. What was the verse? Why had Skelton marked it? Was it a cry for help, a justification for what he had done, or another manipulation? Investigators tried to understand what was going through his mind that day, but John Skelton has never explained his actions. He has never told anyone what really happened in that house. FBI Special Agent Corey Burris would later testify about what that note meant. That was his passive admission to killing the children, a father's final message to his ex-wife, confessing without confessing, apologizing without explaining, leaving her with nothing but questions and a lifetime of grief. The search for Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton began immediately. Police dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers combing through fields and woods, divers searching ponds and rivers. The FBI joined the investigation within days. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated. For weeks, then months, then years, searchers refused to give up hope. But the boys were never found. Not a trace, not a single piece of physical evidence pointing to where their father had taken them. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The community of Morenci was devastated. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not in their quiet little town where everyone looked out for each other. Neighbors joined the search parties. Local businesses put up flyers. Churches held prayer vigils. The whole community came together, united in the desperate hope that Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner would be found safe. But as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, hope began to fade. The searches continued, but with each passing day, the likelihood that the boys were still alive grew smaller. Investigators privately acknowledged what they couldn't say publicly. They were no longer looking for living children. They were looking for remains. And John Skelton? He was talking. Oh, he was talking plenty. But nothing he said was the truth. From his hospital bed, John Skelton started talking. What came out of his mouth would be the first in an endless series of lies. Stories so elaborate, so detailed, and so utterly false that investigators spent years chasing ghosts. The first lie, Joan Taylor. Skelton told police he had given the boys to a woman named Joan Taylor. She would keep them safe, he said. She would protect them from their mother, who he claimed was abusive. He provided details about this woman, enough to make the story seem credible. Police launched an exhaustive search for Joan Taylor. They checked databases. They followed leads across multiple states. They interviewed anyone who might know her. Weeks of investigation led to one conclusion. Joan Taylor did not exist. She was a figment of John Skelton's imagination, invented to buy time and mislead investigators. The Joan Taylor lie was particularly cruel because it gave Tanya hope. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that her sons might be alive somewhere, being cared for by this mysterious woman. When investigators determined that Taylor didn't exist, that hope was crushed. It was the first of many emotional roller coasters John Skelton would put her through. But Skelton wasn't deterred by the failure of his first lie. He simply moved on to the next one. That's the thing about pathological liars. When one story falls apart, they just create another. They have no shame, no guilt, no concern for the damage their lies cause. They just keep spinning new tales, each more elaborate than the last. When that lie fell apart, Skelton came up with another one. He told investigators he had given the boys to an underground sanctuary, a secret organization that protects children from abusive parents. He claimed this group operated outside the law, hiding children whose parents believed they were in danger. The boys were safe, he insisted. They were being cared for. He just couldn't say where. Investigators looked into this claim too. They found no evidence that any such organization existed. No underground network. No secret sanctuary. Another lie. Then came the Amish angle. Skelton began claiming that the Amish community had his children. The Amish live throughout Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. They keep to themselves. They don't use modern technology. It would be the perfect place to hide 3 boys, Skelton seemed to suggest. Police reached out to Amish communities across the region. They showed photos of the boys. They asked if anyone had seen them or knew anything about children being brought into their communities. The response was the same everywhere. Nothing. No one had seen Andrew, Alexander, or Tanner. The Amish were as baffled by Skelton's claims as everyone else. An Amish woman at a bakery in Camden, Michigan, later told reporters she remembered when the Skelton brothers vanished. It was in the paper every day, she said. When asked about the claim that Skelton left the boys with the Amish, she said if someone had brought children to them, I think they would call the police or someone. But Skelton wasn't done with the Amish story. Years later, while serving time in prison, he watched a reality TV show about former Amish people. One of the cast members was a woman who had also written murder mystery novels. From his prison cell, Skelton sent investigators on yet another wild goose chase, claiming this reality TV personality knew where his sons were. It was another lie. The woman had no connection to Skelton, no knowledge of the boys, no involvement whatsoever. He had simply seen her on television and decided to use her name to further mislead police. The audacity of this lie was staggering. Here was a man sitting in prison, watching television, spotting someone on a reality show, and thinking, "I'll say she knows where my sons are." It showed a mind that was always scheming, always looking for ways to manipulate, always treating the investigation like a game to be played. Investigators had to take every lead seriously, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. What if this time he was telling the truth? What if the boys really were with some underground group, some religious community, some woman they hadn't found yet? They couldn't afford to dismiss anything because the stakes were too high. 3 children's lives hung in the balance. But every lead went nowhere. Every story fell apart under scrutiny. Every lie was eventually exposed. And through it all, John Skelton seemed almost to enjoy watching investigators chase their tails. He was the center of attention. He held all the power. He knew the truth and he wasn't telling. The pattern was clear. Every time one lie was exposed, John Skelton invented another. He seemed to enjoy the game, stringing investigators along, giving them just enough detail to make them think they were getting close, then watching as each lead turned to dust. Meanwhile, Tanya Zuvers was living in hell. Every false lead meant another surge of hope followed by crushing disappointment. Every lie her ex-husband told meant more time spent searching, more resources devoted to chasing ghosts, more days without answers. In court filings years later, Tanya's attorney laid out the devastating logic. If John felt his boys were unsafe with Tanya, and he was able to truly hide the boys with an underground group for their safety, why would he attempt suicide? Why would he tell multiple lies and provide misdirection for the police? If his story were true, one would be led to believe that he should be happy in his endeavor to hide his boys, not suicidal. Why lie, deceive, misdirect, and withhold information? His actions do not match up with the multiple lies he has told. The answer, investigators believed, was simple. John Skelton lied because the truth was too horrific to admit. He lied because admitting what he had done would mean facing the consequences. He lied because somewhere in Lenawee County, or perhaps beyond, 3 little boys were buried, and he had no intention of ever revealing where. Each lie was more elaborate than the last. Each story was designed to send investigators in the wrong direction, to waste their time and resources, to keep hope alive just enough that they might stop looking for bodies and start looking for living children. It was a psychological manipulation on a massive scale, and it worked, at least for a while. But investigators never stopped suspecting John Skelton. Even as they followed his leads, they knew in their hearts that he was playing them. The evidence pointed in one direction. Those boys were dead, and their father had killed them. Everything else was just noise. The question wasn't whether John Skelton was responsible. The question was whether prosecutors could prove it without the bodies of 3 little boys. As we go on, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. To understand what happened to Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton, you have to understand their father. And to understand John Skelton, you have to go back. Back to the marriage that was falling apart, back to the custody battle he was losing, back to a man who was watching his control slip away. Tanya filed for divorce on September 13, 2010. Just 10 weeks before the boys disappeared. The marriage had been troubled for years, but things had recently gotten worse. Much worse. 2 months before the boys vanished, while Tanya and John were still married and living together, Tanya got a frantic call from their son's elementary school. John had just shown up and taken all 3 boys out of class. He told the school he was taking them on a trip to Florida, where his parents lived. He didn't know when they'd be back. Tanya was blindsided. She hadn't agreed to any trip. She didn't know John was planning to leave the state with their children. She immediately called the police. Officers were able to contact John before he left Michigan. They convinced him to bring the boys back. Crisis averted, or so it seemed. But the incident was a preview of what was to come. John Skelton had already shown he was willing to take his children without permission, to lie about his plans, to use his sons as pawns in whatever game he was playing. After that incident, Tanya filed for divorce. She was granted full custody of Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. John was given visitation rights, but the court recognized that he posed a risk. The attempted Florida trip had been a warning sign, one that, in hindsight, should have been taken more seriously. When Thanksgiving 2010 arrived, Tanya faced a difficult decision. John wanted to see the boys for the holiday. Despite what had happened in September, despite her fears, Tanya agreed to let them spend Thanksgiving with their father. She was trying to be fair. She was trying to keep some semblance of normalcy for her children. She thought one holiday visit couldn't hurt. It was a decision that would haunt her forever. In hindsight, everyone involved wished they had done something differently. The school administrators who let John take the boys in September wished they had called police immediately instead of waiting for Tanya to do it. The court officials who handled the custody case wished they had ordered supervised visitation. Tanya herself wished she had never agreed to let John have the boys for Thanksgiving. But you can't know the future. You can't predict that a father who seems troubled but not dangerous will do the unthinkable. You can't protect against every possibility. Tanya was trying to be reasonable. She was trying to be fair. She was trying to maintain some relationship between her children and their father, because that's what good parents do. She couldn't have known that John Skelton had already made his decision. She couldn't have known that in the weeks before Thanksgiving, he was sitting at his computer, researching ways to kill. She couldn't have known that when she dropped her boys off for what she thought would be a normal holiday visit, she was sending them into the hands of a man who had already decided they would never come back. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. John Skelton was a man who couldn't accept losing control. The divorce meant losing his wife. The custody arrangement meant losing daily access to his children. His world was collapsing, and he was desperate to maintain some form of power. Experts in family annihilation, cases where a parent kills their own children, have identified common patterns. The perpetrator is often a father going through a divorce or custody battle. He often feels humiliated, rejected, powerless. He sees the children not as individuals but as extensions of himself, as possessions. If he can't have them, no one will. The cruelest part? Many of these men don't simply kill their children. They make them disappear. They hide the bodies. They deny closure to the surviving parent. It's the ultimate act of control. Even in death, even after the worst has happened, they still hold all the power. They still have information the other parent desperately needs. They can still inflict pain by refusing to tell the truth. John Skelton fit this profile perfectly. He had already tried to take the boys once and been stopped. When Thanksgiving came, he tried again. This time, no one stopped him in time. Looking at Skelton's behavior in the weeks before the boys disappeared, the warning signs were everywhere. He was becoming increasingly unstable. He was making irrational decisions. He was fixated on the idea that Tanya was somehow unfit to raise their children, a claim that had no basis in reality but that he seemed to genuinely believe. Friends and family later recalled that Skelton had been acting strangely in the weeks before Thanksgiving. He was withdrawn. He was secretive. He was making comments about protecting the boys that didn't quite make sense. But no one thought he was capable of what he allegedly did. No one imagined that a father could harm his own children. That's the thing about family annihilators. They often seem normal on the outside. They go to work. They pay their bills. They attend family gatherings. And then, when the pressure becomes too much, when they feel their control slipping away, they do the unthinkable. The monster was always there, hiding beneath the surface. It just took the right circumstances to bring it out. And for 15 years, he held onto his secret. For 15 years, he watched Tanya suffer. For 15 years, he let her wonder if her boys were alive somewhere, being raised by strangers, growing up without her. He let her hope. He let her grieve. He let her exist in a limbo worse than death. That is the cruelty of John Skelton. Not just what he did to his sons, but what he has continued to do to their mother every single day since. Friends and family of Tanya described the toll the case took on her. She couldn't move on. She couldn't grieve properly. Every holiday was a reminder of what she had lost. Every time she saw a boy who looked like Andrew, or Alexander, or Tanner, her heart would stop. What if? What if they were still out there somewhere? John Skelton knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that by refusing to tell the truth, he was prolonging Tanya's suffering. He knew that the uncertainty was worse than death itself. And he seemed to take pleasure in it, or at the very least, he felt no remorse. Psychologists who study family annihilators have noted this pattern. The withholding of information about the children's location is a final act of control. Even after everything else is taken away, freedom, reputation, family ties, the perpetrator still has one thing the surviving parent desperately wants: knowledge. And they guard it jealously, using it as a weapon to inflict maximum pain. This is what Tanya has lived with for 15 years. This is the special kind of hell that John Skelton created for the mother of his children. And this is why, when the opportunity finally came to charge him with murder, prosecutors were determined not to let him walk free. While John Skelton was telling his lies, investigators were building a case. They couldn't find the boys, but they could find evidence of what their father had been planning. The Google searches were the most damning. FBI Special Agent Corey Burris testified that in the weeks before the boys disappeared, John Skelton had searched for how to break a neck, potassium cyanide, and rat poison. These weren't idle curiosities. These weren't research for a book or a school project. These were searches conducted by a man contemplating murder. Think about that for a moment. A father of 3 young boys, sitting at his computer, typing those words into a search engine, researching ways to kill, exploring methods of poisoning, learning how to break a human neck. And then, weeks later, those same 3 boys vanish without a trace. Defense attorneys might argue that Google searches don't prove anything. People search for all kinds of things out of curiosity. Writers research crimes for their stories. Students research topics for school projects. But John Skelton wasn't a writer. He wasn't a student. He was a father going through a bitter divorce, about to lose custody of his children. And he was searching for ways to kill. The combination of those searches and the subsequent disappearance of his sons is damning. It shows premeditation. It shows planning. It shows a man who was thinking about death in the weeks before his children vanished. Prosecutors will argue that this wasn't idle curiosity. It was research for a crime he was about to commit. The timing of the searches wasn't random. They were conducted in the same month the boys disappeared. Skelton wasn't having dark thoughts years earlier that he'd since moved past. He was actively researching killing methods just days before his children vanished. Then there was the physical evidence inside his home. Police documented everything. The broken glass, the severed electrical cords, the noose hanging from the banister. It looked like a crime scene. It looked like something terrible had happened there. The suicide attempt itself raised questions. Was it genuine remorse? A guilty conscience? Or was it staged, another manipulation, another lie designed to generate sympathy? Skelton claimed he had tried to hang himself and fallen, breaking his ankle. But some investigators wondered if the injury had happened differently. If perhaps he'd hurt himself while doing something else entirely. Cell phone records provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Investigators learned that around the time his sons were last seen alive, Skelton had traveled approximately 25 miles to Holiday City, Ohio. Cell tower data placed his phone there between 4:29 a.m. and sometime later that morning. Why would a father of 3 young children drive 25 miles in the middle of the night? What was in Holiday City that required a pre-dawn trip? And what did he do there before returning home? Skelton never explained the trip. He never told investigators what he was doing in Ohio in the early morning hours. He simply added it to the list of questions he refused to answer. The timing of that trip is crucial to understanding what may have happened. If Skelton left Morenci in the pre-dawn hours, he would have had time to travel to a remote location, do whatever he planned to do, and return before anyone noticed he was gone. The 25 miles to Holiday City could be covered in about 30 minutes. That gave him a window of several hours, enough time for unspeakable acts. Investigators have searched extensively in the Holiday City area and along the route between there and Morenci. They've used cadaver dogs. They've used ground-penetrating radar. They've interviewed property owners and checked abandoned buildings. But the search area is vast, and after 15 years, any remains would be extremely difficult to find. The borders between Michigan and Ohio have been particularly interesting to investigators. If Skelton crossed state lines with his sons, dead or alive, it would have implications for the case. Federal jurisdiction could come into play. The FBI was already involved, but interstate transportation of victims could open up additional charges. Police also recovered Skelton's blue Dodge Caravan, the vehicle he would have used to transport the boys. They searched it thoroughly. Forensic teams went over every inch. But whatever evidence might have been there was either cleaned up or never left behind in the first place. To this day, if anyone recalls seeing a blue Dodge Caravan in the Morenci area or in Holiday City, Ohio, around Thanksgiving 2010, investigators want to hear from them. That vehicle may hold the key to finally learning what happened to Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. The note Skelton left for Tanya was analyzed as well. "You will hate me forever, and I know this." Those words were not the words of a man who had safely hidden his children with a loving caretaker. Those were the words of a man who had done something unforgivable, something that would make the mother of his children hate him for the rest of her life. Detective Lieutenant Jeremy Brewer, the lead investigator from Michigan State Police, has spent years on this case. In March 2025, he testified that he had no doubt whatsoever that John Skelton killed his 3 sons. The evidence pointed in one direction. Every investigator who had worked the case reached the same conclusion. The only thing missing was the boys themselves. The circumstantial case against Skelton was overwhelming. The motive was clear. He was losing custody of his children. The opportunity was undeniable. He had them alone for the holiday. The evidence of premeditation, those Google searches, showed he had been planning something terrible. And his behavior afterward, the lies, the misdirection, the refusal to cooperate, was consistent with a guilty man trying to avoid consequences. But in the American legal system, circumstantial evidence isn't always enough. Prosecutors need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And without bodies, without physical evidence, without a confession, that standard is difficult to meet. So investigators kept working. They kept following leads. They kept hoping that one day something would break. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking on John Skelton's prison sentence. Every day that passed brought him closer to freedom and brought the families of his victims closer to despair. In September 2011, less than a year after his sons disappeared, John Skelton pleaded no contest to 3 counts of unlawful imprisonment. Not murder, not manslaughter, unlawful imprisonment because without bodies, prosecutors couldn't prove the boys were dead. The sentence, 10 to 15 years in prison. It was the maximum allowed for the charges. The judge made clear that he believed Skelton had done far worse than simply imprisoning his children. But the law required proof, and without physical evidence, the charges had to fit what could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. For the families of murder victims, there is usually some form of closure. A body is recovered. A funeral is held. A grave can be visited. The grieving process, as painful as it is, can begin. But for Tanya Zuvers, there was none of that. Her sons were gone, but she couldn't bury them. She couldn't say goodbye. She couldn't even know for certain that they were dead. And so she waited, year after year after year. Every birthday that passed, Andrew would have been 10, then 11, then 12. Alexander would have been 8, then 9, then 10. Tanner would have been 6, then 7, then 8. The years accumulated. The boys grew older in her imagination, even as the reality of their fate remained frozen in time. Tanya posted about her sons on social media, keeping their memory alive. On November 4th, 2020, what would have been Alexander's 17th birthday, she wrote, "There is not a day that goes by that I don't think of you and your brothers. Today is supposed to be a day of celebrating you, and I hope and pray that wherever you are with your brothers and celebrating you together today. Wherever you are, even after 10 years, she still held on to hope. Hope that maybe, somehow, the boys were alive. Hope that John Skelton's lies contained some grain of truth. Hope that one day her sons would find their way back to her. That hope, as painful as it was, may have been the only thing keeping Tanya going. The alternative, accepting that her children were dead and that she would never see them again, was too devastating to fully embrace. So she existed in a state of perpetual uncertainty, grieving children who might still be alive, hoping for a reunion that might never come. The psychological toll of this kind of ambiguous loss is devastating. Experts who study grief have found that the uncertainty of not knowing whether a loved one is alive or dead creates a unique kind of trauma. There's no closure. There's no ability to fully grieve. There's just endless waiting, endless hoping, endless wondering. For Tanya, every anniversary brought fresh pain. Every Thanksgiving was a reminder of the last day she saw her sons. Every Christmas was marked by their absence. Every birthday, Andrew's, Alexander's, Tanner's, was celebrated in memory rather than in person. The boys grew older in age progression photos while remaining forever young in their mother's heart. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children kept the Skelton brothers' case active throughout the years. They released age progression images showing what Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner might look like as they grew older. These images served a dual purpose. They kept the case in the public eye, and they provided a way for anyone who might have seen the boys to recognize them. Meanwhile, John Skelton sat in a Michigan prison, refusing to provide any information that might bring closure. He was eligible for parole multiple times over the years. Each time, the parole board denied his release. In 2020, Tanya received a letter informing her that the parole board had once again rejected Skelton's bid for freedom. Pursuant to your request under the Crime Victim Rights Act, this letter is to notify you that the Michigan Parole Board has made a decision in this case. The letter read, he would remain behind bars, but the sentence had an end date. No matter how many times parole was denied, John Skelton would eventually complete his maximum 15-year term. That date was November 29, 2025, 15 years and 3 days after his sons were last seen alive. As the release date approached, a terrifying possibility loomed. The man who investigators believed had killed 3 children would walk out of prison a free man. He would have served his time. He would face no additional consequences. He would be able to rebuild his life while Tanya continued to live without her sons, without answers, without graves to visit. If you're following this case, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Because what happened next changed everything. The years in prison did nothing to soften John Skelton. He never expressed remorse. He never provided information. He never showed any sign that he cared about the suffering he had caused. Guards who dealt with him described a man who was detached, cold, unemotional. A man who seemed to have no conscience. Several times over the years, investigators approached Skelton in prison, hoping he might finally be ready to talk. Each time, he refused. He maintained his innocence. He stuck to his lies. He acted as though he was the victim, a father who had been wrongly imprisoned for trying to protect his children from an abusive mother. The abuse claims were investigated thoroughly. Investigators found no evidence to support them. Tanya had never been accused of abuse before Skelton made his claims. No teachers, doctors, neighbors, or family members had ever reported concerns about the boys' safety with their mother. The allegations appeared to be another lie, another attempt to justify the unjustifiable. As Skelton's release date approached, the family braced for the worst. After 15 years, the man they believed had killed 3 innocent children was about to go free. There was nothing they could do about it. The sentence was what it was. Unless something changed, John Skelton would walk out of prison on November 29, 2025, having paid a price that seemed laughably inadequate for the crime he was suspected of committing. In December 2023, Tanya Zuvers did something no mother should ever have to do. She filed paperwork in Lenawee County Probate Court to have her 3 sons officially declared dead. Under Michigan law, a person is typically considered dead after they've been missing for 5 years. Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner had been missing for over 13 years. They were children when they vanished 9, 7, and 5 years old. If alive today, Andrew would be 23. Alexander would be 20. Tanner would be 18. Adults, men, living their lives somewhere, if John Skelton's stories were true. But no one believed those stories anymore. Not the police, not the FBI, not the prosecutors, and not Tanya herself, despite the small part of her heart that still held on to hope. This decision came after much thought and discussion with my family and friends. Tanya wrote in a statement, "It did not come lightly and was definitely a difficult decision to make. No parent wants to lose a child, but to have the courts step in and declare them deceased is just unfathomable." The petition wasn't just about closure. It was strategic. Tanya wasn't only asking the court to declare her sons dead. She was asking them to declare that John Skelton was responsible for their deaths. If she could get that ruling, it might open the door to murder charges. A trial was held in July 2024. 5 witnesses testified, presenting the evidence that had been gathered over 14 years. The Google searches, the lies, the cell phone records showing the trip to Ohio, the note that said, "You will hate me forever," the pattern of control and manipulation. Everything investigators had pieced together was laid out before the judge. John Skelton was given the opportunity to participate in the hearing via video conference from prison. He could have finally told the truth. He could have provided information that might bring some closure to the mother of his children. Instead, he said, "I'm at a disadvantage. Anything I say isn't going to make a difference." Even facing a court proceeding that would officially declare his sons dead, John Skelton refused to cooperate. He refused to provide any information. He refused to explain what had happened. He simply shrugged off the entire process, as if the fate of 3 children was beneath his concern. His words hung in the air. "Anything I say isn't going to make a difference." It was the statement of a man who had already given up, or a man who was still playing games. After all these years, after all the pain he had caused, he couldn't be bothered to tell the truth. He sat in his prison cell, connected by video, and essentially told the court that he didn't care. The hearing included testimony from investigators who had worked the case for years. They described the evidence they had gathered. They explained why they believed John Skelton had killed his sons. They talked about the Google searches, the lies, the note that said, "You will hate me forever." One by one, they built the case for what had happened to Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. Tanya sat in the courtroom, listening to every word. She had lived with this nightmare for 14 years. Now she was hearing it laid out in clinical detail. The evidence that her children were dead, the case against the man who had killed them. It was brutal. It was necessary. And it was the first step toward justice. On March 5, 2025, Lenawee County Judge Catherine Sala issued her decision. She declared that Andrew Ryan Skelton, Alexander William Skelton, and Tanner Lucas Skelton were legally dead. Their official date of death was set as November 26, 2010, the day after Thanksgiving, the day their father was supposed to return them to their mother. But the judge stopped short of ruling that John Skelton was responsible for their murders. While she found the evidence deeply troubling, she concluded there wasn't sufficient proof, under the specific legal standard required, to declare that he had killed them. The boys were dead, but officially, at least for the moment, their killer remained unnamed. "It is with the gravest of condolences," Judge Sala said, "that it is ordered Alexander William Skelton, Andrew Ryan Skelton, and Tanner Lucas Skelton are presumed to be deceased. 14 years after they vanished, the Skelton brothers were finally, officially, dead. But their father was still scheduled for release in 8 months. And without murder charges, there was nothing to keep him behind bars. The ruling was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave Tanya a measure of legal closure. She could now settle her sons' estates. She could officially end the limbo that had defined her life for 14 years. On the other hand, it made the horror of what had happened undeniably real. Her boys were gone. There was no more hoping they might be alive somewhere. The court had declared what her heart had known for years. Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner were dead. The judge's refusal to name John Skelton as the killer was frustrating but understandable. The legal standard for such a finding is high, and Judge Sala had to follow the law. But everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. Everyone who had followed this case knew the truth. The man responsible for those boys' deaths was sitting in a prison cell, counting down the days until his release. Prosecutors, however, were not done. They had been building a case for years. They had been waiting for the right moment. And the declaration of death gave them exactly what they needed to move forward. As we move on, like, share, subscribe and turn on notification. November 13th, 2025. Just 16 days before John Skelton was scheduled to walk out of prison a free man, prosecutors filed murder charges. 3 counts of open murder. 3 counts of tampering with evidence. After 15 years of investigation, 15 years of lies, 15 years of a mother's agony, John Skelton was finally being held accountable for what everyone believed he had done. The timing was no coincidence. Prosecutors had been building their case for years, waiting for the right moment. The March ruling declaring the boys legally dead removed a major obstacle. It established as a matter of law that Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner were no longer alive. With that finding in place, murder charges became possible even without bodies. 5 days later, on November 18, 2025, John Skelton appeared in a Lenawee County courtroom for his arraignment. He heard the charges read against him. 3 counts of murder for killing his own sons. 3 counts of tampering with evidence for hiding their bodies and obstructing the investigation. The judge set bond at $60 million, $20 million per child. It was a staggering amount, a clear signal that the court had no intention of letting this man walk free while awaiting trial. John Skelton, who had been days away from release, would remain behind bars. The $60 million bond was one of the highest ever set in Michigan. It reflected the severity of the charges and the danger prosecutors believed Skelton posed. A man who had allegedly killed 3 children and hidden their bodies for 15 years was not someone who should be out on bail. The judge agreed. For John Skelton, the charges represented a dramatic reversal of fortune. Just weeks earlier, he had been counting down the days until his release. He had served his time for unlawful imprisonment. He had refused to cooperate with investigators, betting that they couldn't prove murder without bodies. He had been right for 15 years. Now, finally, his bet had failed. The open murder charges mean that prosecutors can pursue either first-degree or second-degree murder convictions. First-degree murder requires premeditation, evidence that Skelton planned the killings in advance. The Google searches about breaking necks and poisons would support that theory. If convicted of first-degree murder, Skelton would face mandatory life in prison without parole. The tampering with evidence charges relate to Skelton's alleged concealment of his sons' bodies and his obstruction of the investigation. His lies, his misdirection, his refusal to tell the truth, all of it could be considered tampering. These charges carry additional prison time that would be added to any murder conviction. Tanya Zuvers released a statement through her family. Today, we have been informed that an arrest warrant has been issued for John Skelton, who has been incarcerated for the past 15 years and was scheduled for release in just over 2 weeks. This latest development has left us shocked and heartbroken all over again. Shocked and heartbroken, even good news, in a case like this, brings pain. The murder charges meant prosecutors believed they could prove what Tanya had known in her heart for 15 years, that John had killed their sons. But it also meant reliving every detail, facing the evidence, sitting in a courtroom while the worst moments of her life were dissected for a jury. Our priority has always been, and continues to be, finding out what happened to Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner and seeking justice for them. The statement continued. We ask that the investigation be allowed to proceed thoroughly and without interference so that the truth may finally come to light. The truth, after 15 years of lies, that's all Tanya has ever wanted. Not revenge. Not even justice, necessarily. Just the truth. What happened to her boys? Where are they? What were their final moments like? Did they suffer? Did they know what was happening? Did they cry out for their mother? These are questions John Skelton could answer. These are questions only he can answer. And for 15 years, he has chosen silence and lies over giving a grieving mother the smallest measure of peace. The statement concluded. We remain deeply grateful to all who have supported us, prayed for us, and kept our boys in their hearts over these many years. On December 18, 2025, John Skelton appeared virtually in court for a probable cause conference. The legal process is now moving forward. A trial date will be set. Evidence will be presented. And finally, after 15 years, a jury will decide whether John Skelton murdered his 3 sons. Criminal defense attorney Bill Barnwell, speaking about the case, acknowledged the challenges facing prosecutors. It's always more helpful when you have a larger operation investigating major crimes, he said, noting that the initial investigation was handled by Morenci's small police department. If there are any problems with the investigation, I 100% guarantee you, the defense counsel is absolutely going to pick that apart. But prosecutors are confident in their case. They have the Google searches showing premeditation. They have the cell phone records showing the mysterious trip to Ohio. They have the note confessing that Tanya would hate him forever. They have 15 years of lies demonstrating consciousness of guilt. And they have testimony from investigators who have no doubt about what happened. The trial will be closely watched. Cases like this, where a parent is accused of killing their own children, always draw intense public interest. The emotional stakes are enormous. The questions of guilt and innocence are literally matters of life and death. And the outcome will determine whether John Skelton spends the rest of his life behind bars, or whether he somehow escapes justice once again. For Tanya Zuvers, the trial will be excruciating. She will have to sit in a courtroom and listen to testimony about her children's final hours. She will have to look at the man she believes killed them. She will have to relive the worst moment of her life over and over again as prosecutors build their case. It will be painful beyond words, but it will also be the closest she has ever come to justice. The murder charges were a breakthrough, but one question remains unanswered, the question that has haunted this case from the very beginning. Where are Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton? 15 years of searching, hundreds of tips investigated, thousands of hours spent by law enforcement, volunteers, and private citizens looking for any trace of 3 little boys. And still nothing. No bodies. No remains. No physical evidence of where John Skelton took his sons after they were last seen alive. Investigators have theories. The pre-dawn trip to Holiday City, Ohio, suggests Skelton may have driven across state lines. The 25-mile distance would have given him access to rural areas, wooded land, bodies of water, places where remains could be hidden and never found. Some have speculated that Skelton may have had help, that someone else knows where the boys are but has remained silent. Others believe he acted alone, carefully planning a disposal method that would leave no trace. The Google searches about breaking necks and poisons suggest he was researching multiple approaches. Whatever method he ultimately chose, it was effective enough to keep his sons hidden for 15 years. Michigan State Police Detective Lieutenant Jeremy Brewer, who has worked this case longer than anyone, continues to appeal for information. Every so often we'll get a tip that makes a lot of sense to us, he has said. We'll throw everything at it, all our resources, but obviously nothing has panned out. The detective has specifically asked anyone who remembers seeing a blue Dodge Caravan in the area around Thanksgiving 2010 to come forward. Skelton's vehicle was seen leaving Morenci. It was tracked through cell phone pings to Ohio. Somewhere along that route, investigators believe, is the answer to what happened to those 3 boys. We rely on the public quite a bit to be our eyes and ears on the ground, Brewer said. Someone saw something. Someone knows something. Maybe they didn't realize it was important at the time. Maybe they've kept quiet for 15 years, unsure of what they witnessed. But any piece of information, no matter how small, could be the key to finally bringing Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner home. The search for the Skelton brothers has become one of the longest-running missing children cases in Michigan history. Over the years, hundreds of tips have come in. Each one has been investigated. None has led to the boys, but investigators refuse to give up. They know that somewhere, somehow, there is evidence of what happened. They just need to find it. The terrain around Morenci and Holiday City has been searched multiple times. Cadaver dogs have been brought in. Specialized equipment has been used to scan for buried remains. But the area is vast fields, forests, waterways, abandoned properties. A body could be hidden anywhere. 3 small bodies could disappear completely, especially after 15 years of weather and natural decay. Some investigators believe the boys may have been disposed of in water. A river, a pond, a drainage ditch. Water makes recovery extremely difficult, especially after so much time has passed. Others believe they may have been buried on private property, somewhere that searchers haven't thought to look. Without John Skelton's cooperation, finding them may be impossible. The technological advances of the past 15 years have given investigators new tools. DNA analysis has improved dramatically. Forensic techniques that didn't exist in 2010 are now standard. If remains are ever found, identification would be relatively straightforward. The problem isn't identifying the boys, it's finding them in the first place. John Skelton could end this mystery today. He could tell investigators exactly what he did and where he put his sons. He could give Tanya the ability to bury her children, to have a grave to visit, to finally say goodbye. He has chosen not to. That choice is itself a form of ongoing cruelty. Even now, facing murder charges, even knowing he will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, John Skelton refuses to provide the one thing that might bring some measure of peace to the mother of his children. He holds onto his secret like a trophy, the last bit of power he has over a woman he apparently wanted to destroy. Psychologists who study cases like this say that withholding information about victims' remains is one of the cruelest things a perpetrator can do. It extends the pain indefinitely, prevents closure. It gives the killer ongoing power over the surviving family members. Even from behind bars, even stripped of his freedom, John Skelton still controls something that Tanya desperately needs: the location of her children. Some perpetrators eventually break. They confess on their deathbeds. They have a change of heart in prison. They decide, after years of silence, to finally tell the truth. But John Skelton has shown no signs of doing this. After 15 years, he remains as committed to his lies as he was on day one. There's no indication that he will ever voluntarily reveal what happened to Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. That means the only hope for finding the boys may be through traditional investigative work, tips from the public, advances in forensic technology, or the discovery of physical evidence that has somehow survived 15 years. It's a long shot, but investigators haven't given up. And neither has Tanya. Andrew Skelton would be 23 years old today. Alexander would be 20. Tanner would be 18. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has released age progression images showing what the boys might look like now. Young men with their whole lives ahead of them. Lives they'll never get to live. Futures that were stolen from them by the one person who should have protected them above all others. Tanya Zuvers has never stopped fighting for her sons. She has never stopped hoping that one day, she'll be able to bring them home. She has spent 15 years in a nightmare that no parent should ever have to endure. Not knowing if her children are dead or alive. Not knowing what happened to them. Not being able to grieve properly or move forward. The murder charges are a step toward justice. But justice is not the same as closure. Justice will not bring back Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. It will not undo what was done to them. It will not give their mother the answers she desperately needs. Only John Skelton can do that. And so far, he has chosen cruelty over compassion, lies over truth, power over peace. The murder trial, whenever it takes place, may provide some answers. Prosecutors will lay out their case, presenting all the evidence they have gathered over 15 years. The defense will challenge that evidence, arguing that without bodies, there can be no proof of murder. And a jury will have to decide, based on what they hear, whether John Skelton is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But even a conviction won't answer the most important question. Where are Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner? Even if John Skelton spends the rest of his life in prison, he can still choose to take that secret to his grave. He can still deny Tanya the chance to bury her children. He can still maintain his power over her, even from behind bars. Some have suggested that prosecutors should offer Skelton a deal. Tell us where the bodies are and we'll recommend a lighter sentence. But would Tanya want that? Would she trade justice for closure? Would she accept seeing her children's killer get less punishment in exchange for the location of their remains? It's an impossible choice, and it's a choice she shouldn't have to make. John Skelton could end this tomorrow by simply telling the truth. The fact that he has refused for 15 years, tells you everything you need to know about the kind of person he is. This Thanksgiving marks 15 years since Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton were last seen alive. 15 years since they spent the holiday with their father. 15 years since they vanished from the face of the earth. For most families, Thanksgiving is a time of gratitude and togetherness. For Tanya Zuvers, it will forever be a reminder of the worst day of her life. The Skelton brothers deserved better. They deserved a father who loved them more than he hated their mother. They deserved to grow up, to go to school, to fall in love, to have families of their own. They deserved to live. Instead, they became victims of a man who saw them not as children to be protected, but as possessions to be controlled or destroyed. If you have any information about this case, anything at all, please contact the Michigan State Police at 517-636-0689 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THELOST. 3 little boys deserve to come home. Their mother deserves to know the truth. And John Skelton deserves to face the full consequences of what he has done. This case is not over. The trial is coming. And Crime Case Voices will be there to cover every moment of it. If you want to follow this story to its conclusion, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The trial will be a defining moment for this case. For 15 years, John Skelton has avoided facing the full consequences of what he did. He served time for unlawful imprisonment, a serious charge but nothing compared to murder. Now, finally, he will be held accountable for the deaths of his 3 sons. Prosecutors have had 15 years to build their case. They have the Google searches, the cell phone records, the suicide note, the lies. They have testimony from investigators who have worked this case since the beginning. They have the declaration of death from earlier this year. And they have the unwavering belief of everyone who has ever looked at this case that John Skelton killed his children. The defense will try to create reasonable doubt. They'll argue that without bodies, there's no proof of murder. They'll challenge the Google searches as circumstantial evidence. They'll point to Skelton's claims that he gave the boys to an underground group. They'll do everything they can to avoid a conviction. But the truth has a way of coming out. And after 15 years of lies, after 15 years of suffering, after 15 years of a mother waiting for justice, the truth is finally about to be heard in a court of law. Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton were 9, 7, and 5 years old. They trusted their father. They loved him. They had no idea what was coming. They deserved so much better. They deserved to grow up. They deserved to live. If the boys had lived, Andrew would have graduated from high school in 2019. He might be in college now or starting a career or building a family of his own. Alexander would have graduated in 2021. He'd be a young adult, finding his way in the world. Tanner would have graduated in 2023. He'd be starting the next chapter of his life. Instead, they remain forever young, forever frozen in time as the little boys who disappeared the day after Thanksgiving 2010. Their photos show smiling children with their whole lives ahead of them, lives that were stolen by the one person who should have protected them above all others. The Skelton brothers case has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of custody disputes, the warning signs of family violence, and the importance of taking threats seriously. Experts who study family annihilation point to cases like this as examples of what can happen when a controlling parent feels their power slipping away. The warning signs were there. The attempt to take the boys to Florida without permission, the escalating tensions during the divorce, the irrational claims about the mother being abusive. But no one connected the dots in time. No one realized just how dangerous John Skelton had become. This case has prompted calls for better training for law enforcement, social workers, and family court judges in recognizing the signs of potential family violence. It has highlighted the need for more resources to protect children during custody disputes. And it has served as a painful reminder that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous. Rest in peace, boys. We haven't forgotten you. Thank you for watching. This is Crime Case Voices. Stay safe out there.